Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing John Truby's 2022 book, The Anatomy of Genres. I did read this on ebook, so I unfortunately don't have a cover to share with you. I'll talk very, very briefly about the author, go into an overview about what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it. I'll switch it up a little bit and probably talk about who I would recommend the book to, and then I'll probably go into what I will be reading for next time. I reviewed Anatomy of Story, which is John Truby's most famous work, a couple weeks back. So I'll link to that below if you want to know more about John Truby. But real quick, he is a story consultant, has had students work on many famous works, and has probably best known for that book, The Anatomy of Story, which is a very famous writing craft book, specifically for screenwriters, but really for all kinds of different writers of different mediums. This book just came out this last year, and is his look at genres. So he identifies 14 genres, and he goes through each one and gives you examples of the genre, how he came to the genre, what he sees as important works in each of the genres. Talks about how in some genres gives you examples of where genres were cross-pollinated, so you have kind of mashups. An example is Star Wars, which is a science fiction, fantasy, myth, which are three examples of three different genres that he identifies in the book. So everything from horror to love to comedy to myth to fantasy, science fiction, western, action. So he goes through each one and explains, here's some examples, here's how he came to it, and really the bulk of the writing is on what he sees as how that genre connects to all the other genres almost in a philosophical level. So for instance, he views the detective novel as really about the epistemological search for truth in the world and what does true mean, and how it's really a battle between the hero and the villain about whose version of the world will be believed, as an example. So what did I like about this book? Having just finished Anatomy of Story, he does do a great job of bringing in new stuff. So by that I mean there's a lot of examples that are very, very recent. He gives you, where he can, examples of literature, movies, and TV shows, and compared to Anatomy of Story, which was really stuck, I think, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even though it was written in 2005, I believe, 2005 or 2007. He uses a lot of new examples in this book, which I really appreciated, and I think it gives someone who's maybe just coming into screenwriting a place to kind of jump on. Some of the sections are better than others. I think he has in the beginning a section on who this book is for, which I appreciated. And I think that his writing compared to Anatomy of Story is a little bit clearer in this book than it was there. I liked he has kind of 7 steps that he talks about in the beginning that make up the hero's, I think it's the hero's change in the story. I thought that was pulled from Anatomy of Story and kind of remixed a little bit. So I liked that stuff. So that's mostly what I liked. I think that for people who I would recommend this to, if you were someone who read The Anatomy of Story and really wanted more John Truby and wanted his take on genres, then you're going to really like this book. If you're someone who read Anatomy of Story and really bounced off it and didn't really relate to it as much like I did, that was the boat I was in, you're going to have a hard time with this. And I would really recommend, if you did feel that way, you're not going to feel any different about this book, because it's very much, his tone is very similar. He has a hard time, in my opinion, he has a hard time with being brief. He tends to go on and repeat the same information again and again. And maybe it's because this is supposed to be more of a reference book and I just read it straight through. And so, it feels like there are certain parts that he kind of repeats himself in one chapter, and then the next chapter he repeats it, in the next chapter he repeats it. And just the whole thing felt really padded. I didn't really care for his, he has sections in some of the chapters about his relationship to the genre, about how he came into it. We talked about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid a little bit, about him meeting William Goldman. And I didn't need any of that. I think that could have been cut. I think it should have been cut. My version was on ebook, and I think it was 850 pages. I don't know how many pages it would have been in the hardcover or paperback, probably 400. But it felt like he probably could have cut 10 to 20% from each of the chapters. And if you're someone who has not read Truby before, I would still go to I would still go to Anatomy of Story because he takes a lot of the same ideas from Anatomy of Story and builds on them here, or uses them again here. And so I would say that's more of a complete look at how to write and what he considers to be good writing in that book than this. This really is focused on genres. What is the genre? What are some examples of the genre? What is his relationship to the genre? And really from a philosophical level of what does this genre mean to people? And so, fantasy being, again, the detective one is probably the best one that's clearest in my mind. It's really about the search for truth. And he kind of goes through each one of those things. The action is really how to live a moral life by acting, and kind of et cetera, et cetera. And so what didn't I like about this book? There are parts that I thought contradicted the last book. He has a section where he says, plot beats have more to do with success of the story than any element. Well, in the first book, he talks about the premise and the premise being supreme and superior. And the other part of it is, again, the length of it. I think he could have cut a lot of what he says out. And just for me, it felt like reading a textbook. There wasn't anything here that I thought was like patently wrong, or I just wanted to like fight him on it. It was just very much like, it felt like a slog and a drag. And I did ask myself, like, who is this book really for? If you're someone who's coming into, he has kind of this idea of the hierarchy of genre. And as you get closer and closer to love is at the top and horror is at the bottom. And he has this whole thing of explaining it. I just don't know, again, who that helps and who that's for and who that benefits. If there's someone out there who says, I was going to write a horror novel, but now I'm not going to because John Truby says love is the ultimate expression of being. And you're just like, again, I just didn't get why that was in the thing that he kind of keeps. He ends the chapters and begins the chapters with those kind of connecting points, and I just didn't understand the point of that. I was just like, he says we need all the genres, but there's a hierarchy of genre, and love is the ultimate expression of it. He has parts in the book that he calls the genre transcendent, which is what he considers to be the ultimate forms of the genre, or the parts of genre that haven't really been fully explored. Like in the myth section, he talks about the female myth or the ecological myth, and he gives his opinions on those. And maybe he could have used a better term, and maybe it was the term that was throwing me off. But if he had just said, like, this is unmined or this is an area of fertility that really hasn't been used, then maybe I would have had more easy with it. But calling it the transcendent form of the genre, it just felt like, well, that's like your opinion, and just like, that kind of ignores any kind of ability to execute on any of these things. So like war being the transcendent form of an action genre, it was like, well, says who? And it's his book, and so I guess says him, but it was just one of those things where it didn't fully, again, he's looking at, I think, from more a philosophical textbook standpoint than I would be. And I was just reading this and go, I don't know. And again, I know there are a lot of John Truby fans out there, and so they, I think, would have more patience with some of this stuff and more traction with some of this stuff than I would. But I just felt like reading it that I was just kind of, I was like almost, I ordered a Subway sandwich, and they said, we only have 48-inch subs. So we just have 4-foot-long subs. And I guess, do I have to? And they're like, yes. And so it's like I ordered a 48-inch long sub, and I was just painfully eating the last 2 feet of sub. And that's the way this book felt. It just felt like a slog. And again, if you're someone who likes a more philosophical look at genres than I think, or writing, then you this may work for you. It just didn't work for me, and I bounced off it really hard. I think there was some point, like I said, I thought there were some parts that were interesting. He talks about why 2001 didn't quite work for him. He talks about, there's a section where he talks about in the myth section, Lord of the Rings versus The Wizard of Oz, and how those are two different forms of myth, and why they're two different forms of myth I thought was interesting. There's a part where he talks about the love. I thought the love chapter was like the closest thing to working. What I really wanted from him, and what I was expecting to get from this book, and I didn't get from the book, was I wanted him to take an example from each of these genres, break down the beats, and tell me why these beats are in this genre. So he does a similar thing in his Anatomy of Story. He does a very, very, basically the cross-cuts of L.A. Confidential. And what I was really hoping that he would do is take L.A. Confidential, or whatever example, Casablanca, whatever he wanted to do, and say, here's why L.A. Confidential is a crime story. It has this beat, this beat, this beat, this beat, and this beat. He doesn't really do that in a really clear and concise way. And I wanted one example, here are all the beats, Here's what this looks like. This is how you use these. I wanted basically a beat sheet for the genre. And he doesn't really do that. And he also, what I thought would have been cool would have been to have like a graphic where he had the main genre and just like a bubble web of all the cross-pollinations of that genre. So for instance, if he had done myth, myth is the main genre, and maybe if you have a science fiction fantasy version of myth, it's Star Wars. And maybe if it's just myth action, maybe it's Lord of the Rings, or whatever it would have been. I wish he had done something like that. I think that would have been cool and would have been helpful. I think there may be people who would benefit from having a list of, and the one thing I didn't really quibble with him too much, I think he does a good job of identifying the great works of each of the genres. I can quibble sometimes with where he put the genre. Like I wouldn't put Fast Times at Ridgemont High as a satire. I don't think I think that's kind of a miss, but I could quibble with things like that. But I thought for the most part, if you're looking for a definitive list or a very close list to a definitive list of great works, I think this wasn't bad. Now, whether or not that is worth, picking up the book and reading a 400-page book just to get that, maybe people would disagree. But so I thought that part of it was fine. It was just like, well, who is this book for? Yeah, to me, it was for people who liked John Truby and wanted more from him, and liked the philosophical way of looking at the different genres and really are on his wavelength of why these things are important. How that helps you write is not really something that I really connected with, but I'm assuming there are people out there, given the amount of people who are fans of the first book. I just wasn't one of them. And so that's my review of Anatomy of Genres by John Truby. Next time I'm going to be reading Hyde by Kirsten White. So until next time, please like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I'll leave my link to Anatomy of Story, and I'll also leave a link to a lot of other writing craft videos that I've done for the channel if you want to check those out, if you want something else. If you're just coming to this for the first time, again, I would recommend going to Anatomy of Story because I think it's more of a complete work. He does reuse a lot of the ideas, like the story paths or in the four-corner opposition he uses a couple times in this. So he uses a lot of not a lot, but he uses some of the same ideas in this book as well. So there is a through line through that. And yeah, so I'll have those below. I'll have my Twitter below as well. So until next time, bye.